Hi friends, you're welcome to the part 7 of building a REST API using a Golang standard library. In this lesson, we'll look at how we can connect to our Redis. We use Redis as our caching mechanism. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first thing to do is to check if you have Redis installed. I'll open my terminal, and if you have it installed properly, if you type Redis CLI, let me zoom in a bit, you should have this. And if you type ping, you should get pong back. Alright, I'll cancel out of this. So to be able to use Redis, we need to install the package. So I'll do go get github.com Redis, then go Redis. You can install the version 9. Then if you check your Go mod, you see the Redis here. So this is the Redis that we just brought in. So I'll go to my internal, my db config, and we can create a Redis config here. So I'll create a new file called redis.go, and we bring in a package db config, and we can create a function for it. Function connects Redis, and it's going to be a pointer to the Redis client. And the address, you'll get env. You can put the Redis address, or we have a fallback of localhost 6379. Then let's write the password, get env Redis password, and the db, call it 0, default db. Then we can create a constructor for our Redis. We call it rdb, equals to redis.new client. So new client returns a client to the Redis server. So I'll pick this new client, and it's expecting the options here. So passing the memory address, these options, and address is going to be our address. Then password will be the password, and lastly we have db should be our db, which is 0. I think we forgot the fallback here. I'll come here and put empty like so. Then let's write test connection. So we can have an error returned here. So rdb that is the Redis client dot ping. Then if you take in the context, we can declare a context up here. So var context equals to context background. So we can bring in this context here, and let's use the context inside our ping. Passing my context, then we can pick the result. Then if error does not equal to nil, then we can panic. Then sprint f, want to send out something, sprint f, then can pass in field to connect to Redis. Then we can put in our specifier and pass in the error. But if no error, we want to print something to the console. Print ln, and we can do connected to Redis successfully. And we are missing a return here, and then we want to return that. Let us do return the Redis. So this is our Redis configuration. The next thing to do is to pass it into our core handler. I'll go to my core handler, like so. You can call this Redis. Should be pointed to the Redis client. I'll bring my Redis dot client. Then we can pass it as a param. Pass it here, and we call it Redis client. Redis client should point to the Redis dot client, like so. And lastly, we want to do Redis should be equal to the Redis client, like so. And if you go to our main, you should have an error here because we need an instance of that Redis to be passed. So just like we have the connect to database here, we can write another one called connect to Redis, like so, and we call it rdb, also db config dot connect Redis. So let's use this variable. We can use the defer, then function Redis client, which is a pointer to the Redis dot client, and you can close it later. Also rdb dot close. So let's quickly explain this. So we are using the connect Redis that we declared, right? This is our connect Redis that we declared here. And the defer keyword, we schedule a function call to run after the surrounding function finishes. So it is commonly used for cleanup task, like closing a connection. So we want to call it then after the surrounding function are done. We want to use it to close up. So that is what we have here. And we have this anonymous function, like a function without a name, that is passed as a parameter and calls the rdb close. That calls this. So I hope that makes sense. And so this is just an error coming from my new Vim. We have it here already. So the next thing to do is to use it here, because we need to pass it as an argument. So rdb so it's more of my Novin config error. I'll work on that later. So let's continue. So let's test if our Redis connection is established. I'll just run a, then we see connected to Redis successfully. So one of the common use of Redis is to reduce the load on database or API. So we want to prevent database query for frequently accessed data. For example, say our user profile. So we want to fetch it from the Redis instead of doing a round trip to the database at all times. And if there is a change in the data being fetched from the database, we want to fetch that from the database. So again, you want to fetch frequently accessed data from the Redis and not doing a round trip to the database. So let's look at how we can use that. I'll go to my user.go handler and user profile. So instead of getting the user data from the DB at all times, we want to use Redis. So check the Redis first. So, and we want to write a cache key fmt.printf printf, then the user, let's call the user ID. So we'll pass the specifier here and we're bringing the user ID. So if cached, then this will return an error. We want to bring in the handler.redis.get. So call the get, so expecting our context, then our key. So we can pass in our context, which is our request.context, then our cache key, then we'll pick the result. And the error, if error equals to nil, we want to undo that. So if the cached value exists, we want to do var user store.user, then if error json.marshal, unmarshal. So we want to, it's going to be a byte and pass the cached value. And pass it down to this memory address of the user, and error equals to nil. Then we can return a success response, dot respond with success, then passing our writer, then http dot status okay. Then let us give it a message success. I can say from cache or from Redis, whichever one. And at the end, we're going to pass in the user, and don't forget to return. So this is not byte, but let's explain this. We'll get the user ID from the claims, right? So we retrieve the user ID from the GWT claims, and we created our key, like a unique identifier for each entry. Then we want to check if that data is stored in our Redis first. So if it is stored, that is if error equals to nil, if no error, then we want to be able to send back the data from that was stored in the Redis. But if this data is not stored in our Redis, we want to jump this code block and move down to getting our user. So we want to do a fallback to the DB. So we call this fallback to DB. Right. So we want to get it from the DB first. And after getting it from the DB, we want to set it to the Redis. So we can do user, let's call it JSON. It should be equal to json.marshal. I'll use this. I'll pass in the user that's coming from the DB. Then we can do a Redis dot set. Let's use this. So inserting the Redis, zero expiration means that the key has no expiration time. So we taking the context, the key, and the value, then the expiration time. So set this, passing my request.context. So my cache key, like so, and the user JSON. Then I want to do 5 times time dot minutes. So 5 minutes, and that is all. So we are checking first if our data is inside our Redis, then split from the Redis, and if not, do fall back to the DB. And if then after falling back to the DB, then you want to set it back again to the Redis. So let's give this a whirl. I'll save all, and I'll start the server, and I can open this, go to my client, let's log in and do a rest run. So this is a token. I can copy the token, come here, let's delete this, and I'll paste like so. I'll save. So if I fire this endpoint, it will take the user first from the DB, and in the second attempt it will fetch it from the Redis cache. So I'll do rest run my first attempt. So we got success, right? The message is just success. We have 5 username test user blah blah blah. And if I find the second time, rest run. So this time we got it from message success from cache Redis. So this is not coming from the DB but from cache. Then if I run it again, rest run, we got success from cache Redis. And after 5 minutes, if I fire this, you notice that this is gone. So this is how we can use Redis for caching, which is storing a copy of our user data somewhere that we can retrieve very easily, as opposed to doing a round trip to the DB. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please do to leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.